The night I realized money couldn't save me, I was sitting alone in a house so quiet it felt like it was holding its breath. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I believed success would feel warmer than this. My name is Thomas. I spent 4 decades chasing promotions, bigger paychecks, and the kind of respect that comes with a nice car and a solid address. I'm sharing this now because I don't want you to wait as long as I did to learn what truly matters. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the things we spend our lives running toward often leave us empty, and how it's never too late to choose something better. When I was younger, I thought happiness lived somewhere ahead of me. Not here, not now, but just a little farther down the road. One more raise, one more deal, one more year of grinding. I told myself that once I reached a certain number in my bank account, life would finally slow down and smile back at me. That belief carried me through long nights, missed dinners, and weekends spent staring at a glowing screen while the world outside kept living without me. I grew up in a small Ohio town where people waved from their porches and knew your name before you introduced yourself. My father worked at the same factory for 30 years. He came home tired, but he came home. My mother set the table every night at 6. We didn't have much, but there was laughter and there was time. I didn't understand then how rare that was. All I saw was what we lacked. I promised myself I would never struggle the way they did. So I left. I went to college, moved to the city, and learned how to measure my worth in numbers. Sales figures, bonuses, titles printed on business cards. The higher those numbers climbed, the more important I felt. Or at least, the more important I wanted to feel. I learned how to talk fast, think faster, and sleep very little. People admired my drive. They called me ambitious. No one called me present. In my 30s, I got married. She was patient, kind, and believed in me more than I believed in myself. At first, I told myself I was working so hard for us, for our future, for the life we would someday enjoy together. But someday kept moving. Every time I reached one goal, another appeared, waving like it was just within reach. She started eating dinner alone. I started coming home after she was asleep. We had 2 children. I remember holding each of them for the first time, promising silently that I would always be there. And I was, at least physically, sometimes. I made it to birthdays, but not always bedtime. I paid for summer camps, but missed school plays. When they ran toward me, I was often looking down at my phone, answering emails that felt urgent at the time and meaningless now. By my 40s, the money was good. The house was bigger. The car was newer. From the outside, it looked like I had won. Friends would joke that I was living the dream. I laughed with them, but there was a tightness in my chest that never quite went away. I ignored it. Men like me don't talk about tightness in their chest unless it shows up on an EKG. I told myself this was just the price of success. That stress was normal. That exhaustion meant I was doing something right. I bought things to reward myself. Watches, furniture, vacations. I barely remembered because I spent them answering calls from the office. Each purchase gave me a brief rush, followed by a familiar emptiness that settled in even deeper than before. My marriage began to crack quietly, not with shouting or slammed doors, but with silence, long stretches of it. We talked about logistics, not feelings, schedules, not dreams. She stopped asking when I'd be home. I stopped noticing the look in her eyes when I left early or came back late. I assumed love, like everything else, would just wait. When I turned 50, my company threw me a party. There was a cake, speeches, applause. I stood there smiling while people praised my dedication. That night, I went home and sat in the dark. Living room, still wearing my suit. Everyone else was asleep. I remember thinking, is this it? Is this what I traded my life for? The thought scared me, so I pushed it away. Time has a way of speeding up when you're not paying attention. My kids grew taller, my hair thinned, my calendar filled. I missed the slow, ordinary moments because I was chasing extraordinary ones. I told myself I'd slow down later. Later became a habit, then an excuse, then a lie I told myself so often, it sounded like the truth. At 58, my wife asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. She asked if I was happy. Not successful. Not comfortable. Happy. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. She nodded like she already understood. That hurt more than if she'd yelled. We tried to fix things. Or at least, we said we did. Counseling sessions squeezed between meetings. Weekend trips where my mind stayed at the office. I wanted to want change, but I didn't know how to stop being the man I built my entire identity around. Money had become my proof that my sacrifices meant something. Then came the year everything started to unravel. A market shift. A reorganization. Suddenly, the company that had taken so much of my life didn't need me the way it once did. I still had a job, but the ground beneath me felt unstable. For the first time, I felt replaceable. I worked harder. Terrified of becoming irrelevant. Around that same time, my youngest left for college. I helped carry boxes to the car, gave advice she didn't ask for, and watched her drive away. The house felt too quiet after that. I realized I didn't really know the adult my children were becoming. I had provided for them, but I hadn't always been with them. My wife moved out a few months later. Not in anger, in sadness. She said she felt lonely even when I was sitting right next to her. I wanted to argue, to explain how hard I'd worked, how everything I did was for us, but the words sounded hollow even to me. Love isn't measured in effort alone. It's measured in presence. The night she left, I walked through the house touching things I had bought, expensive things, nice things. None of them looked back at me. None of them asked if I was okay. I poured myself a drink and sat down, surrounded by the proof of my success and the evidence of my failure. That was the first night I really listened to the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was loud. It reminded me of every moment I had postponed, every conversation I had rushed, every feeling I had buried under work. I told myself money had given me freedom, but in that moment, it felt like a cage I had built myself. I went to bed that night, believing I still had time to fix everything. That belief was the only thing that let me sleep. What I didn't know was that life was about to teach me a lesson I could no longer ignore. One that money, no matter how much of it I had, would not be able to soften. The phone rang at 6 a.m, and before I even answered it, something inside me already knew. There's a certain kind of dread that doesn't come from thought, but from instinct. It settles in your chest, heavy and unmoving. On the other end was my sister, her voice unsteady, telling me our father had collapsed during breakfast. By the time I reached the hospital, he was already gone. My father was 76. A man who spent his life working with his hands, who never made much money, who never owned a fancy car. Standing beside his hospital bed, I felt something crack open inside me. He had lived simply, quietly, and when people filled the room to say goodbye, they spoke about his kindness, his patience, the way he always showed up. No one mentioned his bank account. No one asked what he owned. At the funeral, I watched people embrace my mother, share stories, laugh through tears. I realized how little anyone talked about success the way I defined it. They talked about moments, about how he fixed a neighbor's fence without being asked, how he never missed a school, play, how he listened. I felt proud of him and ashamed of myself. All at once. After that day, sleep became difficult. When I did manage to rest, my dreams were crowded with old memories. My children's voices when they were young. My wife's laugh before it softened into disappointment. Moments I had been physically present for, but emotionally absent from. I started waking up before dawn, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. It went cold while I stared out the window. I tried distracting myself the only way I knew how. Work, longer hours, more focus, but something had shifted. The deals felt empty, the victories flat, the stress heavier. One afternoon, during a meeting I would once have considered important, I felt my heart race and my breath shorten. The room blurred. Someone called my name. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the floor with paramedics leaning over me. It wasn't a heart attack, they said. A panic attack. Stress, burnout, words I'd heard before, but never applied to myself. I sat in the hospital room later, alone, staring at the monitor that beeped steadily, reminding me I was still here. For the first time, I asked myself a question I had avoided my entire life. If everything ended tomorrow, would I be satisfied? With how I lived, the answer came quickly. And it hurt. I took a leave of absence from work. My colleagues were polite, concerned. A few even said they envied my ability to step away. I realized then how many of us were quietly drowning, pretending we were swimming. At home, the days stretched long. Without meetings and deadlines, there was nothing to distract me from my thoughts. That was terrifying at first. Then, slowly, it became necessary. I started walking in the mornings, something I hadn't done in years. Just me, the quiet streets, the sound of my own footsteps. I noticed things I'd forgotten how to see. Sunlight through trees, neighbors watering their lawns, the simple rhythm of life happening without urgency. I felt like a visitor in a world I had abandoned long ago. One afternoon, my daughter called. Not for money, not for advice, just to talk. We spoke for nearly an hour about her classes, her fears, her excitement. When we hung up, I realized how rare that had been. I had been available financially for decades, but emotionally, I was only now learning how to answer the phone fully. I reached out to my wife, not to fix things, not to convince her of anything, just to listen. We met for coffee. She looked at me carefully, like someone approaching an animal that might bolt. I told her I was sorry, not in a dramatic way, not expecting forgiveness, just honest. I admitted I had confused providing with loving. She cried. So did I. We didn't reunite that day, or even that year, but something softened between us. Door cracked open. I learned that some bridges can't be rebuilt quickly, but they can be approached with humility. Money had never been the thing she wanted from me. Time was. As weeks passed, I began sorting through my life, literally and figuratively. I cleaned out closets filled with things I didn't need. I canceled subscriptions. I sold items that once felt important. Each decision felt like shedding weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. I simplified my days. Fewer commitments. Fewer distractions. More space to breathe. I volunteered at a local food pantry one morning a week. At first, it felt strange, humbling. Then it felt grounding. I met people who had far less than I did, but laughed freely. People who shared what little they had. It reminded me that worth isn't measured by accumulation, but by connection. That the biggest change happened quietly. I stopped asking myself how much something paid and started asking how it made me feel. I realized I had been outsourcing my sense of value to numbers on a screen. When those numbers went up, I felt safe. When they wavered, I panicked. That's not security. That's dependence. At 68, I finally understood that money is a tool, not a destination. It can make life easier, but it can't make it meaningful. It can buy comfort, but not peace. It can fund experiences, but it can't teach you how to be present during them. I had spent decades confusing means with meaning. I returned to work. Eventually, but differently, I declined a promotion, set boundaries, left earlier. Some people didn't understand. A few judged me. That surprised me less than it once would have. I had learned that approval is expensive, and the cost is usually yourself. My relationship with my children deepened, not because I fixed the past, but because I showed up consistently in the present. I listened more than I spoke. I admitted when I didn't know the answers. They didn't need a provider anymore. They needed a father. My wife and I found a new rhythm. Separate lives, connected by respect and shared history. There's tenderness there now. Not perfect, but real. I learned that love doesn't always look like reunion. Sometimes it looks like understanding. If you're younger than me, hear this. Don't wait for a crisis to examine your life. Don't assume there will always be time later. Time is the one currency you can't earn back. Spend it intentionally. Spend it on people, not just goals. On moments, not just milestones. If you're my age or older, know this. It's not too late. Regret doesn't have to be the final chapter. Awareness can still change the direction of your days. Happiness isn't a reward for success. It's a byproduct of alignment, of living in a way that matches your values. I don't hate money. I respect it now, but I no longer worship it. I've learned that the richest moments of my life cost nothing at all. A conversation, a walk, a quiet morning, a chance to say I'm sorry, a chance to say I love you, and mean it without rushing. At 68, I realized money can't buy true happiness, but it showed me something else. That happiness was never missing. I was just too busy chasing the wrong things to notice it waiting patiently for me all along.